In 2004, Dove released an ad that Unilever's own executives called dangerous. Not dangerous to competitors, dangerous to themselves. It had no supermodels, no celebrities, just a Times Square billboard with 6 real women that the beauty industry had never seen anything like. Unilever's executives tried to kill it. They knew beauty companies don't survive by telling women they look fine as they are. But the campaign went on to become one of the most award-winning in advertising history, and it changed the global conversation about unrealistic beauty standards forever. But here's what nobody mentions. While Dove was telling women the world had been lying to them, the same parent company was running ads for another brand that was doing exactly that line. Critics called it the ultimate corporate contradiction. So the question was never whether this campaign changed advertising. The question is whether it was the most authentic campaign in the history of the industry or the most sophisticated con ever sold to women. This is the story of the Dove campaign for real beauty. Dove wasn't a beauty brand, it was a bar of soap. That was the honest assessment of Mark Wakefield, Unilever Canada's marketing director in 2003, and it was accurate. For the entirety of its existence, Dove had sold exactly one thing: a bar of soap. That was it. No body wash, no face care, no lotion. Just the bar. The tagline, 1/4 moisturizing cream. The format, copy and paste. Generation to generation. No evolution, no edge.
Every bar of Dove is 1/4 cleansing cream.
But by 2003, that formula had a problem. Bar soap was losing the bathroom shelf. Shower gels and body washes were taking over, and younger consumers weren't replacing the bar with another bar. The category was becoming obsolete. If Dove stayed a bar of soap, it was going to slowly become irrelevant. The only path forward was expansion into body wash, face care, hand care, firming products, higher margin categories. But they were categories Dove had zero credibility in. You don't buy face cream from a soap brand, not without a reason to trust it. Here's where Silvia Lagnado enters. Lagnado was Dove's global brand director, and she was brought in not to manage the brand, but to rebuild it. Her mandate was simple but massive: turn Dove from just a soap brand into a full-on beauty company. Lagnado made it clear immediately that Dove couldn't compete by playing the same game as L'Oreal or Nivea. The established beauty brands had decades of glamour equity, celebrity rosters, and aspirational imagery. Dove had a bar of soap and a tagline about moisturizing cream. If they were going to expand into new categories, they couldn't win on the industry's terms. They had to change the terms entirely. The beauty industry in this era had a specific aesthetic. The women in ads were thin. Their skin was flawless. Their proportions were, statistically speaking, impossible. The question Lagnado was asking was simple. If 98% of real women don't look like that, why is all of beauty advertising built for the other 2%? The answer started with a research study, and what that study found was more damning than anyone expected. In 2003, Unilever commissioned a global survey. 3,200 women across 10 countries, ages 18 to 64, were asked a straightforward question. Would you describe yourself as beautiful? Only 2% said yes. The same study found that 57% of women felt beauty had become too narrowly defined by culture and media. 75% of women said they wished the media portrayed more diverse female appearances. And 6 out of 10 teenage girls said they believed they would be happier if they were thinner. Television, glossy magazines, and 2 decades of advertising had quietly told women that their natural appearance was a problem to be solved. Lagnado had her insight. She also had her mandate. The brand's new mission: to make women feel more beautiful every day by widening today's stereotypical view of beauty. In 2003, no major beauty brand in the world had ever run an ad premised on the idea that women were already enough. Not one. The industry had spent 50 years building the opposite case. Lagnado was proposing that Dove stake its entire expansion on dismantling it. Now she needed an agency willing to risk everything to execute it. The campaign was handed to Ogilvy and Mather, Dove's advertising agency since 1954. But Dennis Lewis, creative director at Ogilvy London, did not believe in the brief. He'd spent his career in beauty advertising, operating under what he later called a tyranny of unspoken conventions. The look, the light, the skin, the aspirational, impossible bodies. He couldn't see a way to break out of it that wouldn't look like a bad decision. What changed his mind was one line from his colleague Daryl Fielding, Ogilvy's global category partner, trying to explain the brief to the men in the room. Imagine worrying every day that your dick isn't large enough. Lewis got it immediately. Men were not buried in imagery that made them feel like their bodies were wrong. Women have been, every day, their whole lives. For once, Ogilvy was going to use advertising not to remind women of the gap, but to challenge the industry that had built it. They began working on the visual concept. Lewis first commissioned celebrated fashion photographer Ellen von Unworth. The results came back beautiful and completely wrong. Too stylized, too polished. The women looked like glamorous icons of inaccessibility, which was exactly the problem the campaign was supposed to solve. Lewis scrapped the entire shoot, a huge financial loss. He had just one more chance to get this right. The next photographer couldn't be a guess, so he called John Rankin, a British fashion photographer known for honest, unflinching portraiture. Lewis asked him how he'd approach shooting real women. Rankin's answer was 3 words: let them be themselves. The resulting images, 6 women of different ages, sizes, and ethnicities in plain white underwear lit naturally, unretouched, had a quality that no beauty ad had ever possessed before. They looked true. Lewis knew it the moment he saw them. Lagnado knew it. But what neither of them anticipated was exactly how Unilever's senior leadership would react when the images landed on their desks. Unilever's senior leadership saw the final work and panicked. The decree came down: kill it. On no account should these ads run. The word used internally was dangerous, that these images would seriously undermine the considerable sales of the brand, associating Dove with an ill-judged stunt that could permanently damage brand equity. The order went out: chase every copy, stop everything. Ogilvy and Dove scrambled. The team pulled every copy they could find. They thought they'd got them all, except one set of ads had already been sent to a German magazine. The magazine printed early. Copies hit newsstands before anyone could pull them. And then the readers' responses started coming in. The public loved it. Will Audrey, who later served as Dove's global creative director, described it: a vast mass-market brand had brought an entirely new perspective down from the mountain, and to a section of the audience, it was an oxygenating blast of fresh air. Unilever's executives, who had been frantically trying to stop everything, reversed course in minutes. The campaign was back on. The question now was just how far they were willing to push it. October 2004, Germany and the United Kingdom. Dove simultaneously launched its new product, a firming cream, and the Billboard campaign built around it. Billboards go up featuring Rankin's photographs, with a twist that nobody in outdoor advertising had tried at scale before. Passerbys could vote, right there, in real time. Fat or fit, wrinkled or wonderful, gray or gorgeous. The results updated dynamically on the boards. The tick box billboards spread across Latin America, Europe, and eventually to Times Square in 2005. In Canada, when the firming lotion campaign was casting for its local version, over 600 women responded to a single casting call, willing to strip to their underwear for the ad. The Canadian tagline: 10 curvy thighs, 5 shapely buns, 0 bony supermodels. The numbers came back fast. In Europe, firming cream sales jumped 700% in the first 6 months. In the US, when the campaign landed in July 2005, featured product sales were up 600% within 2 months. Dove's bar soap market share in the US grew by 1 full point per month for 5 consecutive months, an extraordinary sustained run in a flat category. Then, in February 2005, Dove Canada launched Little Girls, a short film that ran in cinemas and on television. It showed striking portraits of young girls with captions like, "Thinks she's fat" and "Hates her freckles." The ads were deliberately placed on shows like America's Next Top Model and Nip Tuck to create maximum ironic tension. People and news channels talked about the campaign so much that it was like getting free advertising. This free attention was worth 30 times more than the money Dove actually spent on the ads. The campaign was so compelling that 1.5 million people visited the Dove website. Here's why the campaign was so effective. Every beauty ad ever made was built on upward social comparison. You see a model who looks nothing like you feel the gap, and you reach for the product that promises to close it. Dove flipped the mechanism entirely. By showing women who look like the viewer, it triggered something different. Recognition, validation, the feeling of being seen by an industry that had spent decades looking past you. Women weren't buying firming cream because they felt inadequate. They were buying it because for the first time, a brand told them they were enough, and they trusted it. The billboards had made Dove a cultural conversation. But one man at Ogilvy, Toronto, had an idea for a 75-second film that would make the billboards look like a warm-up act. In early May 2006, Tim Piper, associate creative director at Ogilvy, Toronto, photographed his girlfriend Stephanie Betts without makeup. Then he digitally enhanced some of those images, step by step, to show how she could be transformed into a billboard model. The proposal was 6 words. Even models don't look like models. The film runs 75 seconds. Makeup artists go to work. Hair is styled. Post-production stretches her neck, widens her eyes, adjusts her proportions, until Betts no longer looks like herself. She looks like the woman on the billboard. The film ends with the quote, "No wonder our perception of beauty is distorted." It was released in October 2006 on Dove's website and YouTube. Within days, Ellen DeGeneres and Rosie O'Donnell were showing it on their talk shows. Good Morning America, CNN, Fox News, Entertainment Tonight, Inside Edition, all covered it. Again, zero paid media, zero distribution budget. The film spread entirely through word of mouth at a time when going viral was still a new concept. By the end of October 2006, Evolution was the most watched video on YouTube, with 1.7 million views in its first month. US media value alone was estimated at over $50 million. Total global earned media, over $150 million. By the end of the campaign's first 3 years, Dove's global sales had grown from $2 billion to $4 billion. The campaign generated 30 times its paid media spend in total exposure value. Unilever clients later called it the highest ROI in the history of advertising. In 2015, Ad Age named the Campaign for Real Beauty the #1 advertising campaign of the 21st century. But as the trophies piled up, one inconvenient question followed the campaign everywhere, and Unilever had no clean answer to it. The same year Dove released Evolution, Unilever's Axe body spray brand was running ads portraying overly sexualized women who became incapable of rational thought the moment a man applied body spray. Meanwhile, in 2007, Dove released Onslaught, an 80-second film showing a young girl being buried in rapid-fire beauty industry imagery. Diet pills, liposuction, skin treatments, women reduced to their bodies. It ended with, "Talk to your daughter before the beauty industry does." A senior ad industry planner named Rye Clifton cut that film together with Axe ads and changed one line at the end. "Talk to your daughter before Unilever does." That mashup spread everywhere. The Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood launched a formal letter campaign in 2007. Their message was direct. The Axe body spray campaign made it clear that any concerns Unilever had about girls' well-being took a backseat to exploiting stereotypes for profit. With Axe, Unilever was creating the same toxic environment that the Dove Real Beauty campaign was actively fighting. The letter campaign generated over 1,800 letters to Unilever's CEO. Unilever's position was consistent. Axe was comedy. Nobody was meant to take it literally. But beyond the Axe contradiction, academic critics had their own case against the Real Beauty campaign. Researchers argued the campaign was what they called gender washing, using women's empowerment as a marketing tool while simultaneously selling firming cream that told women their bodies needed improving. The fundamental tension here is a campaign challenging beauty standards that was, at its commercial core, designed to sell more beauty products. And the casting brief for the campaign's Real Women reportedly specified no tattoos, no scars, flawless skin, beautiful hair, and bodies that fell nicely between not too curvy and not too athletic. The definition of real had its limits. The contradictions were real. The critics weren't wrong. But none of it answers the bigger question, which is, did any of this actually change the beauty industry? Before 2004, every major brand operated under the same unspoken agreement. The women in the ads would be impossibly thin, professionally lit, and digitally perfected to a point no living human could reach. That was just how it was done. Dove broke the agreement, and other brands followed their lead. In August 2005, Nike launched My Butt is Big, a humorous print campaign celebrating the exact body parts the fashion industry had been telling women to fix. In January 2014, American Eagle's lingerie line, Aerie, launched the #AerieReal campaign, pledging to never retouch its models. They credited Dove directly as the inspiration. Sales jumped 20% in the year that followed. Unretouched bodies were no longer a risk. They were a strategy. In 2024, on the campaign's 20th anniversary, Dove extended that founding principle into the present, pledging to never use AI-generated images to represent real women in its advertising, drawing a line in an industry already drowning in synthetic faces. The Real Beauty campaign, now in its third decade and still running, won 3 Cannes Lion Grand Prix in a single year in 2025. Most campaigns can't survive 2 years. This one is still winning the industry's highest honors at 21. But the Axe contradiction, the gender washing critique, they are all real. The casting brief, with its quiet asterisks about flawless skin and acceptable body types, is real. So was the campaign authentic? Or was it a con? It was both, and that's what made it revolutionary. Dove's belief in the campaign was genuine. The commercial motive underneath it was also real. But the beauty industry had never once let those two things exist in the same ad. Dove did. And whether that makes it brave or cynical depends entirely on what you think advertising is allowed to be. What isn't debatable is the outcome. Every body-positive campaign that followed, every brand pledge to stop retouching, every Real Women ad you've seen since 2004, that's because of Dove. That's the story of the Dove campaign for Real Beauty. If you like stories about advertising campaigns that transformed culture, moved billions, and built business empires, then you'll love this next video.